All right, this is the review Kahoot. Just wait for Ryan to get in, and then we'll get started. Hopefully, this will help you guys on your test or your, excuse me, post assessment. All right, there's Ryan. So here we go, Ryan. I'm sharing the right screen, correct? I believe so.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. You're a little quiet today, so wasn't sure. All right, here we go. Mounting resentment to immigrants led Congress to create laws that limited immigration into this country. It was the Immigration Act of 1890, Irish Restriction Act of 1910, Immigration Restriction Act of 1921, or the Labor Law. All right, it is the 1921. So good job. We've been talking about the 1920s, so that's what you should remember. And it's definitely, I mean, this question is talking about immigrants. There is an Immigrant Act of 1890, which does limit immigration. But in this case, we're going to the Immigration Restriction Act of 1921. We hear about immigrants today, you know, on the southern border being an issue that's very fought over in politics. And it was the same in 1921. It's just immigrants from different areas. All right, nice job, Ryan. Okay, what did the new American middle class create? A market for foreign goods, a market for custom goods, a market for luxury goods, or a market for mass-produced goods? Awesome, Ryan. Yeah, it's definitely a market for mass-produced goods. This is where the assembly line started with
I
Henry.
was close to pick. I almost picked luxury good. I was like, no, that ain't right.
Yeah, I almost did when I was going through this myself. And then I'm like, oh, mass-produced goods. Yeah, they're making all kinds of stuff on assembly lines now, and that's what these factories are coming around. And they're selling vacuum cleaners to housewives and that kind of thing. So this is that time where they're first selling these mass-produced goods to the middle class or the normal person in America. All right, good job again. What condition did President Warren Harding promise to bring back to America? Victory, normalcy, prosperity, or isolation? Oh, it's normalcy. Okay, it was kind of.
I was thinking that was it, but I was like, no, I don't think it is. And I picked prosperity instead.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of on the same lines of Donald Trump's "Make America Great Again," which was the thinking, because things weren't going great, and President Harding said, "Let's bring it back to normal, or how things were." And that's where this normalcy came from, you know. So that's, I'm not comparing him to President Trump at all. I'm just saying it was trying to play on the past of what they remember as being the good times. So that's where normalcy wasn't a word back then, but I think I just saw that it was made a word one of the last couple of years. They keep making a bunch of words. Every year they add words to the dictionary. I think they just added the word wanna, like want to, wanna is now a word. You know, I want to go fishing. So instead of keeping the language intact, they're going to add words. All right. The period of rebirth of African American art forms is known as the Black Eagles, Great Migration, Harlem Revival, or Harlem Renaissance. She doesn't know what she's doing. All right, good job with the Harlem Renaissance. This was a time, like you said, when, or you got it right, but the time of this rebirth of African culture. Actually, it wasn't really a rebirth. I mean, they call it a rebirth, but I think it was kind of the birth of modern African culture, African American culture in America. You know, in the slave times, they weren't allowed to allow their culture to grow. But in this case, we see the poetry and the books and the literature and the the music all growing from this Harlem Renaissance time period. And well, Renaissance sounds better than beginning. It does mean rebirth. So I guess it shows this rebirth of African American culture. All right, good job on that. All right, what amendment gave the women the right to vote in 1920? The 20th, 21st, 19th, or 22nd? Tough one right there. Nice try.
Oh yeah, I was thinking. Wait a minute, it's the 19th, not the 20th.
Yeah, I always remember it because
women let vote.
They normally say 1920, and I always remember that the amendment is one before the 20. So I know it's one amendment before the actual year. There's a few amendments in our Constitution that are more important than others, and the 19th Amendment is one of them that they kind of refer to sometimes, especially in any kind of standardized test you take. So just be aware of that. You might see this one. All those other amendments, they're not as important. I think the 21st is the repealing prohibition, if I remember correctly, but I get them all wrong myself, and I do this for a living. So just because there's no need to know them all. A few of them, like the 13th Amendment, is going to abolish slavery, and so since I know that one, then the 14th is, the civil rights one, and then the 15th is the fair voting one. So, there's only so many you really need to know, but the first 10, those are good. The Bill of Rights, but besides that, you don't need to exactly know. All right. Movement where African Americans moved to northern cities in search of jobs to escape poverty and discrimination. Great Northern Movement, Great Assimilation, Long Trek Northward, Great Migration. Yes, this is the Great Migration. There are going to be two of them, so there's going to be another migration later on, and it's going to not only move north, but it's going to see people moving west and north again. So it's African Americans. I mean, basically, because of slavery, African Americans were in the southeastern part of the United States. That's what we call the South. So basically from Texas over to the end of to Florida, that's considered the southeastern part of the United States. And then from under Ohio, down. Okay. And people from all those areas, not all of them, but a lot of African Americans are going to move up during this time period. And that's going to be this Great Migration, or the first Great Migration. Good job on that, Ryan. Okay, the ratification of the 21st Amendment marked the end of, and I already said it, a segregated society, prohibition, women's suffrage, or the progressive movement. And yes, prohibition. And I said, I think it's the prohibition. I'm glad that proved me right. I'm often proved wrong. It feels good to be right here and there. But yeah, this is one of the first things Roosevelt does when he's in office is really campaign for the repeal of this amendment. And basically they had to write another amendment to stop the previous amendment. And to do this, I mean, amendments are really tough to do. You have to get 3/4 of the states to agree, or what is 3/4 of 50? 3/4 of 100 is 75, so 50 is half of that. I don't know. You can do the math. I'll pass on that. I teach social studies, but it's a lot. Okay, 3 out of every 4 states have to agree, but it's going to bring in a lot of tax dollars. I mean, we talk about stopping stuff or making stuff every time for every person that doesn't like legalizing marijuana. Well, if you make it legal, you bring in a bunch of tax dollars because the government's going to tax the heck out of it. All right. The Harlem Renaissance refers to efforts of the American artists, writers, and musicians of the 1920s and 30s to tell about African American culture through African American experiences, why whites discriminate against African Americans. Yes, it's definitely about African Americans telling their own story, and they're telling their culture, they're telling what it's like to be them, and I mean, if you were just like any person, nobody knows what it's like to be you. We all have our own set of baggage that we go through, and all these African Americans weren't always the same either. You know, some were educated, some were, you know, came straight up from the South, and they were on a plantation their whole life, whether they be slave or free. So everyone has different experiences, but they're sharing them in the ways that people are seeing really for the first time in print and in paintings and, you know, just art in general. You're on fire, Ryan. Good job. Okay, the suffrage movement in the United States refers to the belief in which group's right to vote? Women, African Americans, landowners, or American Indians? Yeah, it is women when it comes to the suffrage movement. Uh, the funny thing about the 15th Amendment I brought up was it said all men could vote regardless of the way they looked, basically. But women weren't allowed to vote. So it was, you know, it took a long time for women in our country to vote. And historically,
Wait, so were black males able to vote before women were?
yes. Yeah, they
I
were.
thought back then all white people hated black people.
It was definitely not all. It's never going to be all. Nothing's ever all. But no, after the Civil War, African Americans were allowed to vote. It's simple as that. But in the southern states, after this period called Reconstruction that we talked about briefly at the beginning, where the government controlled those states, our federal government, and they made it good for African Americans. After that period where the government finally left because it was causing too much money and we wanted to move on other issues in our country, that's when the Jim Crow laws took over in the South. And they made a bunch of laws which made it difficult for African Americans to vote. And a lot of them stopped voting in those southern states. And including in those laws, and that's why they call systematic racism. That's a big part of it right now, because those laws were systematic. You know, they're part of the system. And so that was there for a long time until those laws in the 50s are going to be repealed. And we'll get to that later on. But technically they were allowed to vote. And in other states, they were still allowed to vote throughout the whole country because federally they were allowed. But just in the South, those laws kept them from, they had to pay like a poll tax, or they had to pass a literacy test, you know, where they had to like read a part of the Constitution and explain it. You know, that's tough for people even today to do. You know, some people, I mean, Constitution's written really in language that we don't use today. So that's what kept them from voting, but they were still legally allowed to vote from basically 1865 on. And it wasn't until 1919 that women were allowed.
That's a big difference in voting times.
Yeah, it is. And it just shows you, I mean, the women, I mean, there's more than one discriminated group in our country's history, even though the current media tries to point out just one. Okay, and all of them are, I mean, American Indians, they've been really screwed throughout our history. We gave them not only disease, but we took all their land, you know, and have given
Put
them
them on reservations.
Yeah, put them on reservations where we made them alcoholics. And it's, I don't know, it's not.
They were here first. They were here before we were.
Definitely. So our country has many faults, and there wasn't just one group that, and I just talked a couple of days ago in homeroom about the Japanese Americans be put in those camps. So just kind of our country's history, unfortunately. All right, let's move on. Good job again. All right. What happened on Black Tuesday? World War I ended.
Stock market
crashed. Good job. Many people became wealthy, or the Hoover administration began. All right. Black Tuesday is known as the day the stock market crashed. Okay, October 29th, 1929. All right, so basically it's kind of the end of the Roaring 20s, right there at the end of October. Good job, Ryan. Keep it up. What two causes contributed to the Dust Bowl? Intimidated buyers and overworked farmers, too little water and high wheat prices, overworked land and drought, low wheat prices, and farmers' holidays, right. It was all a natural thing. Well, it wasn't all natural. The overworked land was just, they didn't understand crop rotation, which we do now. That's why you see fields some years that aren't planted. And you're like, wonder why they didn't plant the field this year? Well, they kind of have to let the field kind of get the nutrients back here and there. I'm not an expert in
Yeah, you can't work it too much or the soil gets like dry.
Yeah, the nutrients all come out of the soil somehow. I don't know exactly what it does, but that and drought just were coupled. Those were two of the causes. There's some other causes as well, but those are the. All right. Great job again. All right. What best described Hoovervilles? Mansions found in rich neighborhoods, city row houses built during the Depression, towns founded by President Hoover, or towns of shacks and tents. Yep. These shacks and tents are known as Hoovervilles. They were very primitive. They were for the poorest of the poor who had no jobs and were forced to basically find scraps to put up a house the size of a shed or a tent. Very good, Ryan. Heck, you can take the exam now and ace it, it looks like. How did movies impact popular culture of the late 1920s and early 1930s? Allowed President Franklin D. Roosevelt to address the American public, promoted the traditional role of women in the home, provided an escape from the harsh realities of economic depression, and encouraged passage of the 18th Amendment. And I don't think the slides did this justice, so I wouldn't be too sad about that, Ryan.
It did. It also did promote the traditional role women because it made them seem like they were just people that stay in the house and take care of the kids.
In some cases, I'm not going to argue that, but I mean, a lot of these movies are, the real thing is, and what they always teach us is they provide this escape from this reality of the time. So a lot of, science fiction type movies come out, like King Kong came out during this time. So the original King Kong is in cinema and you're going to see this, and it's not like anything anybody's ever seen. And so these movies that are really far-fetched are out there just trying to open up people's imagination, let them escape from reality. And that's what a lot of the movies were during this time and really tried to promote. All right, let's see what we have next. What was the goal of the bonus army? Payments from the government, housing provided by the government, military promotions, or health benefits? Right, payments from the government. Okay, the hint there is the word bonus. A bonus, if you have a job and you get a bonus, well, you just got an extra payment. But the bonus army are veterans of World War I who were promised a money in 20 years, kind of like a retirement for them. And because of the Depression, they wanted it early. And the President Hoover said, no, we can't afford to give it to you early. We already made this agreement to give it to you in 20 years. So you have to wait till then. And they protested, and President Hoover sent in the first police,
military,
and the National
to
Guard.
push them out.
Yeah, and a couple of veterans were killed. And you don't attack veterans if you're our government. People don't like that.
Yeah, that's why he didn't get reelected, I think.
That's one of the reasons, but yes, that's a big one. All right. What industry did not suffer during the Great Depression? The farming industry, the movie industry, the manufacturing industry, the banking industry. What industry?
I want to say farming.
Say farming.
We're not going to. If it was farm, no, it was movie.
Yeah, it's going to be the movie industry, because remember, this is where people went, even though they didn't have a lot of money, but they had movies so cheap at that time. You can go in and you could escape reality. You can feel like even for an hour or two, like you're in another place. My life's
That'd be
stuck,
nice.
but I'm here and it's kind of cool, at least for a little bit. And that's how people were thinking at the time. And that's why the movie industry was still successful. And yes, the poorest of the poor living in Hoovervilles rarely went there, but there still were people who were working, not making much, but they were working and they would be the people going to the movie industry. All right, 16. What were why were there runs on banks in 1933? People feared they would lose their money, so they took it out. I agree. Good job. Banks were running out of money because after the stock market closed, closed. Sorry. After it crashed, banks started to lose money and more of them started to close because they invested in the stock market too. And people needed the money to pay off their debts to their stockbrokers. And so as everybody was going to take their money out of the bank, well, the banks ran out of money and the only thing they had to do was close. So that made more people go to the banks, wait in long lines, and hopefully they got there before their savings was absolutely gone. Fortunately, the New Deal, which we've been talking about this past week, is going to guarantee your money for the future. So if a bank ever closed, the money you had in there would be guaranteed. All right, Ryan, you're doing a great job. Who would this couple likely be listening to during the Fireside Chat program? Franklin D. Roosevelt, Martin Luther King Jr., Booker T. Washington, or Woodrow Wilson? Right. Fireside Chats were all about Franklin Roosevelt explaining his New Deal programs. And I know I've said that many times, but always you hear Fireside Chat, think of two things: New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt. And they were just radio programs that he explained his stuff. Just wanted to clarify because this is recorded and it is a review. All right, 18. What was Franklin Roosevelt's plan to end the Great Depression known as? Square Deal, Reconstruction Finance Corporation, Fireside Chats, or New Deal? I think that was pretty obvious considering we just talked about New Deal.
Yeah, you were talking about it all day yesterday.
I know we've been talking about it for the last couple of days, but yes, New Deal. New Deal for the American people. That was the full name of it. You know, he didn't actually call it the New Deal originally, but he had a speech where he's like,
hospital now.
I'm not going to later
Why?
because I don't want to right now.
all right, here we go. Good job, Ryan. Oops, I got hit next, don't I? President Roosevelt's actions during the 100 days were focused on relief, recovery, reform, or all of the above. Yeah, those are the three things, the three R's. Relief for the poor who can't do anything at this point. All right, recovery, recover the economy to make things back to normal,
You
and
okay, Michael?
reform, change things so they don't
You're not dying?
again.
Yeah, what you said.
Finally, someone has it. Oh, wait.
All right,
Sorry for being unmuted.
that's all right. In his 1933 inaugural address, President Roosevelt helped Americans see they couldn't do anything to help the U.S. get out of the Great Depression, that there were solutions to the problems of the Great Depression, that there was no solution to the problems of the Great Depression. The problem of the Great Depression could only be solved by less government. Okay, that there were solutions to the problems of the Great Depression. Okay, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And that was part of this speech. And he was talking about the solutions or the problems. We shouldn't be afraid of them. We can get past them. And that was his whole point. He was all about keeping a positive attitude. All right. So Ryan, you did a great job. Ayana, when you watch this video, hopefully it answered every questions. What's that, Ryan?
God.
I got 16 out of 20 right.
At the 80%. Next time you'll get 100 on the exam, right?
Hopefully.
All right. That's all I have for today.
Have a good day.
Yep. So take your post assessment at some point. And yes,
sir.
you have a great day. And I'll see you tomorrow in homeroom.
Okay.
All right. Take care.